Thank you, as always, to the Rav for devoting time to this. This is obviously peak time of the year for questions, but I think we're all very grateful for all the answers that Rav has given so far, and for offering to do another one of these. We've still got a lot of questions.
Yes. Say thank you and chazak uvaruch to all of you for organizing these sessions. Bevakasha.
Pleasure. So I'm going to get started with the questions. The first one actually came in from a few people, which is what one should do about Shabbat meals this Erev Pesach, which is obviously on Shabbat. So may one use matzah ashira? Should the meals, which of the meals should include bread? And should one use bread up until this is still allowed? Must one have sudah shlishit? And if so, how and when? And then a few additional questions. But just to begin with, what should one do about Shabbat meals on Erev Pesach this year?
All right. So these questions involve two issues. One, what we find in the Yerushalmi, Rabbi Levi says that it is asur to eat matzah be'erev Pesach. The question is, when does this isur begin? It is not mefurash in the Yerushalmi or in the Rif or in the Rambam who quote this halacha. It is not mefurash to when does it apply. So if you read in the Rambam's lashon is Rambam's lashon. Let me just read it to you briefly. At the end of Perek Shishi of Chol haMoed matzah, asaru hachamim le'ol matzah be'erev Pesach. Why? Kiddush shehecheyanu. The idea is that we should not be eating the matzah with which we became the miswah of achilat matzah. The Leila Seder, we should not be eating the same matzah in the hours or the day before the Seder. It should be clear that there's a special miswah involved, and it's an act of undue haste, doing something before its proper time. That's why the Yerushalmi compares eating matzah on Erev Pesach to a person who has relations with his betrothed, with his fiancée before getting married. But this lashon of not eating matzah Erev Pesach doesn't necessarily have to mean all of Erev Pesach, and it is a fact. And the Ramban does claim that it means all of Erev Pesach. I think even the Ramban does not include in that the evening before, but the Ramban does claim it refers to all of Erev Pesach. But the Iran, Rabbeinu Nisim, and the Rosh, Rabbeinu Asher, both state clearly that is this only, and the Baal haMeor also. In fact, they all saw it first in the Baal haMeor. They all claim that the Isur is only relevant from the time of when it is no longer mutar to eat chametz. So minat Torah, that is from midday, from shesh sha'oth, which is midway between sunrise and sunset on Yud Daled B'Nisan. And if we take into account the extra 2 hours midivrei sofarim, so that's still 4 hours. But from before that point, it is mutar to eat matzah. L'aniyut da'afi, it seems to me that the shita, the explanation of the Baal haMeor, the Rosh and the Ran is very reasonable. The Ran explicitly quotes the Ramban, but rejects his proof based on the Yerushalmi. To me, that seems correct. So I think one may eat matzah till arba sha'ot on Erev Pesach, Yud Daled B'Nisan. So that means that both the Shabbat meal in the evening, Leil Shabbat, and in the morning, if one eats before arba sha'ot, which, if someone wants to know when that is, I will tell you. At the present time, in the Jerusalem area, it's about 10:15, but that's going to become 11:15 because of the so-called daylight saving system, which is about to come into play the evening before. So till 11:15, one may eat matzah on Erev Pesach, and one can also eat matzah till that point, and one can also eat hametz till that point. That's number one. Number two, normally all three meals on Shabbat are supposed to be made on bread. So there is no reason at all not to have the Seudah of Leil Shabbat, the evening before the Seder, on bread, nor is there a valid reason, it seems to me, not to do so in the morning, as explained just now. The question then becomes, what about Seudah Shalishit, which is clearly beyond the times that we mentioned before, beyond Arba Sha'ot and beyond Shesh Sha'ot. It's asur to eat hametz at that point, certainly, minat Torah, and therefore it's vaday asur to eat matzah at that point, also midivrei soferim. So what does one do? In the Tosafot and in the Rosh and in the Tur, it states that Rabbeinu Tam, for example, first of all, there are many Rishonim who understand that, again, this isur of eating matzah only refers, Erev Pesach that is, only refers to matzah haru'uya laset yedei chova, b'leil Seder. To quote from the Rosh, for example, the Rosh writes that the isur of eating matzah Erev Pesach, hainu b'matzah sheruya laset b'yedei chovato b'layla. Again, this to me seems correct. There are many Rishonim who hold this, and other poskim who follow this explanation. And therefore, matzah ashira is allowed. And that's what Rabbeinu Tam, it says in the Rabbeinu Tam in the Tosafot, and is mentioned in the Tosafot and by the Rosh, that he was Mekayim Seudah Shalishit in such a case with matzah ashira. The question is, what is matzah ashira? In Israel today, perhaps in other countries as well, I'm not certain, there are certain kinds of biscuits, hard crackers that are called matzah ashira because they're made with wine. There are certain other ingredients in there as well. I am not very familiar with all those ingredients. I know there is a mahaloketh between various rabbanim regarding those kinds of biscuits that are referred to as matzah ashira. Rav Adi Yosef said they were mutar l'chatchila. Rav Mordechai Eliyahu and Rav Yaakov Yosef, the son of Rav Adi Yosef, said they are asur legamrei. That's chametz gamur. I am not familiar with all the technicalities of how they are manufactured. I've heard some explanations regarding this, but it's not clear to me. So I do not eat those biscuits, Erev Pesach or Pesach. What other kind of matzah ashira is available? I'm not actually certain. What is matzah ashira? I can tell you. Matzah ashira is something that would be made. It seems to me the best way to make it would be, and perhaps this is what I will do this year, perhaps I will prepare a small batch of matzah ashira for this purpose when I'm baking matzah before Pesach. I would add a lot of eggs and oil and perhaps some wine if you want to, but mainly eggs and oil into the dough. And you could also add some honey or sugar or something like that if you want to. And this means that it's called matzah ashira. It's no longer considered lechem oni, and therefore you're not Yitzhak Chovah with such matzah on Pesach. And that you can eat, in my view, as Seudah Shalishit. But it is true, there are some poskim who disagree. The Rama, for example, states, this is the general custom amongst the Ashkenazim, that one should not eat matzah ashira at all. Not Erev Pesach and not during Pesach. And there are different discussions in Machlokot here, which you won't go into now. So if a person does not want to eat matzah ashira Erev Pesach, I would say the best option is to, for Suda Shlishit, is to make it on something like rice crackers or rice. Doesn't have to be a cracker. Rice, cooked rice. Of course, if one doesn't eat kitniyot and doesn't want to hear of that, then that's like not an option, obviously. But if rice is an option for you, then that's a very good option, I think. And any other food that you choose, any vegetables and could be other kinds of kitniyot, could be beans, and it could be salads, and of course it can be some fish and some meat, etc. Because of Suda Shlishit, we have to have Suda Shlishit, but one should not eat very much. One should try and keep the meal relatively small in terms of the volume of what we eat at that Suda Shlishit, because of the din of not entering Pesach, Leila Seder, when one is full and not really interested in eating. We're supposed to be interested, we're supposed to have an appetite. That's why the Mishnah states, Lo yochal Adam Erev Pesachim, or Erev Pesach, there are two nushaot, Lo yochal Adam al shetechshach, samuch laminha, from mid-afternoon, but even before that. So on Shabbat we have a Suda Shlishit. We have to have a Suda Shlishit. Matzah ashira is a possibility. Rice and other kitniyot are a possibility. Either way, it shouldn't be a very large meal. It should be a modest meal in terms of size. It can be nice, important types of food, lichvot Shabbat, but not too much, so that we end up having a good appetite for matzah, miswat achilat matzah, b'leila seder.
Thank you, Harav. As I mentioned, that question came from several people. So I'm just going to go through the people who contributed to it and see if they want anything clarified. Firstly, Chaim Ginsberg.
Yeah, just if one is using rice cakes, like the Rav mentioned, or Seudat Shlishit, what about like Lechem Mishneh by the beginning? Or did I misunderstand that you should first wash and then for the latter part of the meal use rice?
The only way, it seems to me, to still be able to do Lechem Mishneh for Suda Shlishit is to have matzah ashira, which is probably why Rabbeinu Tam and others were noheg that way, because of the inyan of, first of all, it should be a path, some kind of bread, and it should be something that you can have two loaves or two pieces, which you can say, which is like Lechem Mishneh, similar to Lechem Mishneh any other time. But because of the of the restraints and the limitations with regards to Erev Pesach shehaliot b'Shabbat, I think it's possible not to have, as I said, not to have bread bichlal, not to have, that is to say, not to have matzah ashira, and not to have lechem mishneh either at this particular meal.
Doesn't the Rav hold that Seudat Shlishit can be eaten even like earlier in the day, as opposed to those that say it has to be eaten after Mincha Gedolah? And therefore, I would assume that if one wants, one could just wake up early and eat one meal, and then wait, 30 minutes or so, and then immediately eat another meal, all before 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock in the morning, whatever time, latest time.
You are correct. That is possible, but practically speaking, few people are going to be able to do that, and B, willing to do that. Not many people are going to want to squeeze in shalosh se'udot before, in Israel at least, before 11:15. For most people, it's not going to work. They have to daven, they have children, they have a family, whatever. It's possible, I agree, but not very practical for most people.
Thank you. Now, the other person who contributed to that question was Svi in Queens. Svi, did you have anything to have clarified there?
Yes, shalom. Is there a quantity of the matzah shira that has to be eaten so a person could wash and say Birkat Hamazon?
The same as any other Seudah of Shabbat throughout the year. If one ate a kazayit of bread, or in this case matzah, That is sufficient. If one does not wish to eat more, that's okay. One does not need to.
Thank you very much.
Okay. I think the other contributors are not on the line at the moment. So we'll move on to the next question. This was a question from me. When searching through my cupboards before Pesach, I often find items with minor ingredients that may or may not be from chametz, and it is often hard to find out whether it is in fact chametz. So an example here is the flavoring maltodextrin, which in some parts of the world is made from wheat, some parts of the world made from corn. And in my experience, any amount of online research doesn't give me a conclusion as to where what it's made from. Given that it's tiny amounts, although it obviously gives flavor, but it's in tiny amounts and we don't know what it is there any reason to be makel on owning this on Pesach because of the safek?
Understood. Because of the safek that you mentioned, and you're quite right, it's very difficult, nigh impossible to discover what these additives and these substances are actually made of, precisely as you say, because they frequently can be made from various, they can be extracted and produced from various sources and materials. So because of the safek, one should certainly not eat them during Pesach. But because of that safek and because of the very small amount in question, I do not think one has to throw them all away. I think it's sufficient just to lock them up and put them away.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so the next question was from Chaim Ginsberg again, which was, can one make rice bread using only rice and no grains on or for Pesach? Or is there a concern of Marit Ayin?
The Marit Ayin needs to, the Resh and the Aleph are switched around, but we understand the question. Perhaps years ago, this would have been a concern, Marit Ayin. But I know that today one can purchase what looks, for all intents and purposes, to be a bread roll, made of potato flour and certain other substances, and it's entirely kasher Pesach, and it's even kasher for those who do not eat kitniot. In other words, there are many bread-looking, bread-type products on the market today, which are being sold all over the place with hechsher. So therefore, I do not think that if one makes bread from rice dough, there should be any question of Marit Ayin. Not today, not where we live, and not in the reality of today.
Thank you, Chaim. Anything to be clarified? Excellent. Okay. This is an anonymous question, very interesting question about eruv hatzerot on Erev Pesach this year. The questioner says, following the Rav's instructions, I made an eruv hatzerot. However, like many Jews, I use matzot for the eruv. On Erev Pesach, which is also Shabbat, we may not eat matzah. May I still use matzot for the eruv hatzerot, even though we may not actually eat matzot on Erev Pesach? And are there alternatives, or must I simply forego having the benefit of an eruv hatzerot for this particular Shabbat?
Understood. No, one does not have to forego having eruv on this particular Shabbat. As we explained previously, matzah may actually be eaten on Shabbat, on Erev Pesach, till Arba Sha'ot, at least, possibly even till Shesh Sha'ot, but certainly till Arba Sha'ot probably. And therefore, at the beginning of Shabbat, the eruv is perfectly kasher. The matzah may be eaten, so there's no problem with that eruv. The eruv stands and may be used as always.
Okay, thank you. The next question is from Binyamin Lemkin. Could the Rav please explain when brachot acharonot should be said at the Seder?
Good question. All right. Well, in theory, there's no apply to more than one thing. So let's speak first about the cups of wine. With regards to the arba kosoth, I'm not sure if this is one of the questions here, but I'll just explain very briefly. The arba kosoth, there is even a mahloket amongst the Rishonim whether each of the 4 kosoth requires its own borei pri hagafen, but most agree that each one requires its own bracha. But more of the real question is, does one therefore also need to make a bracha acharonot on each kos after drinking each kos? There are different opinions. The opinion that I follow, which I recommend, which is also one of the opinions that the Rif brings 2 opinions. One is that you only need to make the bracha acharonot for wine at the end of the Seder, after 4 kosoth. The other opinion he brings is that you make the bracha after the 2nd and after the 4th. It seems to me, and there are other Rishonim who also speak about making the bracha only at the end. This is also the minhag roeach. This is the general minhag of all of Am Yisrael. This is also the opinion of Rabbi Gaon and others. So, with regards to wine, one does not need to make a bracha acharonot after each of the kosoth, because one intends to drink later, and only at the end of the Seder, after the 4th kos, does one need to make the bracha ala gefen. So what else does that leave us? That leaves us the yarakot, the yarak that we eat at the beginning of the meal. There are those who say that you must eat kazait. There are those who say that you do not need to eat a kazait. If you don't need to eat a kazait, then you also don't have to make if you eat in fact less than a kazait, then you don't have to. You wouldn't have to make a bracha. Practically, I don't see how you can even eat less than a kazait, because kazait is so small. It's 3 cc, which is a very small amount, about a quarter of a normal adult-sized bite, shall we say, or at least a third. That's why we find in the Gemara, in the Masechet Karetoth, that Bet Habliya Mahazik Shalosha Zetim. So I think and there are also those who say that you have to eat more than a kazait of the yarak, because otherwise it's not considered an achila bichla. Anything less than a kazait is as if you didn't really eat anything at all, because it's so small. So I think you should eat a kazait of the yirakoth, and yes, I think you should say borena fashot after having done so, because it's before hamosi, and there's a long time before the seudah, so it's a separate inyan. And this is what Rav Saadia Gaon writes in his Sidur. So that's what I recommend with regards to the yirakoth.
Thank you. Benjamin, did you have anything to be clarified? He can't hear us. Okay, we'll move on to the next question, which is from Svi in Queens. In the galut, does one say shehecheyanu on the 2nd night of Pesach? And what about this wasn't from Svi, but this is a general question. What about on the 7th night of Pesach in all places?
One does not say shehecheyanu, in my view, on the 2nd night of Pesach, nor with regards to the 7th night of Pesach, it is accepted and understood by all that one does not say shehecheyanu.
I vaguely remember from maybe Rav Shaki's Seder as well, it does include a bracha for 7th night Pesach.
Let me just quote to you. Let me quote to you from the Sidur of Rav Saadia Gaon. Rav Saadia Gaon writes in the Siddur that we have before us, which unfortunately is not the complete Siddur of Rav Saadia Gaon, as we know from certain other discussions, as I will mention in one of my future shiurim on Inyanei Basar B'Halav. But in the Siddur that we have before us, which is a wealth, a true treasure trove of important information, on Amud Kof Lamed Hey, Rav Saadia Gaon writes with regards to the Haggadah, the kiddush Leil Seder. He writes that we say the kiddush, and then after kiddush we say shehecheyanu, and then he says v'chen derech hakiddush shel kol hag v'shinui makom shem hag. This is how we do kiddush every chag. He says, whether it's Shavuot, Sukkot, we always say kiddush. We just change the reference to the relevant hag. Then he says, and this is worth taking note of, Huf min hag hashmada, except for the hag of the destruction, which refers to Yom Shvi'i Shel Pesach, referring to the hashmada of the Misrim. Apparently, Rav Saadia did not agree with those who claimed that we should be in somewhat a non-joyous state of mind, shall we say, Yom HaShvi'i of Pesach. And that's why we don't say Hallel on the Shvi'i Shel Pesach. There is such a Midrash Haggadah, but that's a very strange source and not to be relied upon. And as you see here, Rav Saadia Gaon didn't think so at all, because he says that on Haga Hashmada, we don't say shehecheyanu. He says Mufurash, Chutz min Haga Hashmada, which is Shvi'i Shel Pesach, she'en omrim bo shehecheyanu. Does that mean that there were no other opinions or minharim in the world in the time of Rav Saadia Gaon, or before him or after him? No, it doesn't mean that. But I do not see any reason to say shehecheyanu b'Shvi'i Shel Pesach. It is not considered a regel b'fnei asmo, like Shmini Aseret is. It's not a separate regel. And that is the real reason that we do not say Hallel Shalem except for the first day of Pesach. The rest of the days of Pesach we only say Hallel b'dilug, not complete or half Hallel as it is called sometimes. And the real reason is, as is mentioned in the Talmud Masechet Karetoth, in the Masechet Arachin, because of the fact that there's no the korban is the same every day of the 7 days of Pesach. The korban musaf is the same korban. There's no change from one day to the next, whereas on Sukkot there is. That is why in Sukkot we say Hallel Shalem every day, because every day is in a meaningful and significant way, due to the korban, is a different day from the day before. Whereas each day of Pesach, 7 days, is the same korban musaf. So there's nothing particularly new about today as opposed to yesterday, and therefore we do not say Hallel. And the same applies to Shvi'i Shel Pesach. I would just add here parenthetically, but I think it's important that I say this, that when it comes to Nushaot and Minharei Eretz Yisrael, many of which are found in manuscripts or fragments, usually fragments of manuscripts from the Genizah, it has to be stated that we do not know always who were behind these manuscripts, who wrote them, who formulated them, based on what authority. And therefore, if something does not agree with the accepted halachic principles and Talmudic logic that we see, that we just mentioned with regards to Hallel, for example, which is mefurash in the Talmud, why we do not say Hallel all the other days of Pesach. So even if we do find a manuscript in the Genizah, we don't know who wrote it. We don't know if this person was reliable. All such things have to be examined and weighed up very carefully and with caution. And besum sechel v'yavinu b'mikra u'b'torah. One has to use our sechel. And the basic halachic logic and reasoning does not indicate that we should say shehecheyanu b'Shvi'i Shel Pesach, and Rav Saadia Gaon says so explicitly, and I don't really see how anyone could disagree with that.
Thank you. And why does the Rav hold that one does not say shehecheyanu on Yom Tov? the night of Yom Tov Sheni Shel Galuyot.
Even on Rosh Hashanah in Chutz La'aretz, which the Talmud refers to as Yoma Arikatha, even there we have a mahaloket, as quoted in the Torah, for example, between Rashi and Rashi's teachers. His teachers, Rabbotav Rashi, said that you say shehecheyanu on the second night, and Rashi says that you do not. Even when the second day is considered, for all intents and purposes, like the first day. The second day of Pesach in Chutz La'aretz is not considered to be the same for all intents and purposes. It's not considered a Yoma Arichutha. So I don't see any valid argument why one should say shehecheyanu on the second night.
Thank you. Svi, did you have anything to be clarified about the shehecheyanu question?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Thank you. So the next question is from Yehoshua Felberg in Harish. Is the custom of breaking the fast on...
Just one second. I see that Chaim is asking, so why do we say kiddush? Well, you could ask the same question of why do we say tefillah shel Yom Tov in Chutz La'aretz on Yom Tov Sheni, and why do we do any of the things that we do? And the answer is because if we didn't do these things, it wouldn't be Yom Tov, and the whole takana would unravel. And as long as this takana exists, and it obligates us, we are required to act as on Yom Tov. But that does not necessarily require that we say shehecheyanu.
Thank you, Harav. So this question from Yehoshua is the custom of breaking the fast of the firstborn early by making or attending a siyum a valid custom, or is it preferable to fast? And I think behind that is the obvious question is, should firstborns be fasting on this year Thursday before Pesach?
Right. Well, on the one hand, there is a source in Masechet Soferim, and it's also alluded to in the Talmud Yerushalmi, but from the Yerushalmi, it's not clear that all bechorot fasted on Yud Gimel, on what we call Tanit Bechorot. From the Yerushalmi, it seems that not everyone was doing so. Practically, we see that Am Yisrael, for many, many generations now, has decided that it does not want to, practically speaking, continue with this custom, but rather than make such a clean break, as it were, and openly say, well, we do not wish to, or we find it too difficult to fast, then the custom came about of doing a siyum or something like that in order to get out of fasting. As the Aruch HaShulchan writes that, Lo ra'inu wa lo shamanu, we have not heard for many, many generations anyone who actually fasts on this day. So I would say that if, practically speaking, Am Yisrael does not fast, then you cannot claim there's a minhag to fast. You cannot claim there's a minhag to fast because many people are going to a siyum, so they won't have to fast. The mitzvah is no one's fasting. So it seems to me that this minhag has the Sibur has not has decided does not want to continue with this minhag.
And if one had the previous practice of keeping the fast and not attending a siyum, and now wants to change that, should one do hatarat nedarim?
Yes, I think one should.
Okay, thank you. So the next question is from Chaim. What are the parameters for what may be written and what may not be written on Chol haMoed? To my understanding, this is Chaim speaking. To my understanding, the Rambam holds anything that is considered maaseh hedyot would be permitted, whereas the Ra'avad holds that it is generally forbidden, unless there is a specific need that one must write, and it cannot wait until after the Hag is over. Which of these positions does the Rav feel should be followed, and why?
I think the position of Rambam is the basic pshat of the Halacha. All the isurim of Malacha and Chol haMoed have to do with a kind of Malacha or omanuth that people do for their livelihood. The whole purpose was to prevent people engaging in the practices that they do on a daily basis for their livelihood, so that Chol haMoed will be a special time. So if someone asks you to write down the phone number of someone they need to call, to jot it down on a piece of paper, that is clearly no kind of melacha in the sense of it's not an omanuth. It's not something that anyone would ever pay you for. It's not calligraphy. Calligraphy is the opposite of ma'aseh hediyot, right? It's people are paid to produce beautifully drawn up kithubot or other documents, what have you, because it's calligraphy. It's something special. Not everyone can do this, and it's a melacha in the sense of being an occupation. It's the kind of occupation or skill that a person learns and makes money by engaging in. No one makes money by writing out a check. If you go to the supermarket on Shabbat, on Chol haMoed, to buy food for the Chag, if you have to write a check, I don't think I've seen many people write checks nowadays. It used to be once upon a time. It used to be more the common thing here in Israel to write checks in supermarkets. But if that's what you're doing, that's in no way any kind of melacha or manuth, and that's not mevatel the aim and the purpose of Chol haMoed. So I follow. I think in this matter, which is also Divrei Sofarim, I think we can follow the view of the Rambam and many other Rishonim who hold that way. And therefore, the only kind of writing that's really asur is Sofer Satan, who's writing tefillin or mezuzot or Sefer Torah or Megillah or Ketubah or a person who engages in calligraphy and that kind of activity.
Thank you. Chaim, anything to be?
Yeah, if someone is like writing, I don't know, a story, a poem, or a blog, and let's say typing. I don't know if typing would be any different than writing, but a lot of people write things up every so often.
I just as one can jot these things down, one can type them up. That's not the kind of activity that Hazal aimed at prohibiting on Chol haMoed. The aim of Chol haMoed is to distance these days from being like regular work days. So that, and as the Yerushalmi states, lo gazru ala malacha bechol haMoed or Chol haMoed ela kedei sheyasku b'Torah. The aim was that people would not engage in their normal day-to-day practices, and rather would spend the days as a kind of semi-Shabbat, shall we say, semi-Yom Tov. So if a person, I see someone asked a question now, I believe about writing a computer program or something. Well, if that's what someone does for one's living, then one shouldn't be doing that on Chol haMoed, unless one's financial situation is so dire that one really has no choice.
Thank you. The next question is also from Chaim about Chol haMoed. May one cut one's nails on Chol haMoed, as stated in the Rambam?
Yes. Well, I will quote briefly from Rambam. Rambam does write in Ilchot Yom Tov Perek Zayin Halacha Kaf Tar Mutar litol safa b'chol haMoed, that is to say, one's moustache to trim it. Ulitol siponayim v'afilu b'chli. One can do so. One can trim one's nails, part one's nails on Chol haMoed. This is the opinion of the Rambam, but not only the Rambam. It is also the opinion of the Rif. It is also the opinion of Rabbeinu Avraham ben Yitzchak Av Beth Din, who happens to have been also the father-in-law of the Ra'avad, often confused with the Ra'avad, but he was a tremendous Chacham in his own right. He is the author of the book called Sefer HaEshkol, which is a interesting and separate discussion, but it's a very amazing and wonderful book. He was a tremendous gaon and held in great awe and with great regard by all Rishonim who came after him. It is true there are some Rishonim who disagree. The Rif even mentions an opinion that said is a asur, but the Rif rejects that opinion, and I think the halacha is that it is mutar to par one's nails on Chol haMoed.
Thank you, Chaim.
Thank you so much.
Okay. So thank you very much, Arav. We've got two related questions now from Benjamin Lenkin, Gabrielle Martindale, and Chaim Ginsberg. So the two questions are: is there any prohibition of carrying merashut l'rashut or leaving the techum on Chol haMoed if there is no specific need for the chag, and if not, why not? And then the related question is Chol haMoed meant for tiyulim or limud Torah? Based on a Tosefta in Sukkah, is the common practice of filling Chol haMoed with trips to different parts of the country problematic?
There is no, before I continue, I just want to add that I forgot to mention that also the Sefer HaMisvot, that is to say the Sefer HaMisvot HaGadol, the Smag, is also of that view, that it's hard to par one's nails on Chol haMoed. All right, so a clear majority of the major Rishonim are of that opinion. With regards to Hosa'a merashut l'rashut, or leaving the techum on Chol haMoed, these things are not asur. Even carrying merashut l'rashut is mutar on Yom Tov, kal v'homer the Chol haMoed. Why are they not asur? For the very straightforward and cogent reason that Hazal never suggested they should be asur, and that which is not asur is mutar. In other words, Chol haMoed Mikar Hadin is a Yom Chol, but it is also a Har, and it's necessary that we perceive it as a special day, and that is why, according to the simple understanding of the various halachot with regards to Isurei Melacha on Chol haMoed, that is why the Chachamim were gozer on Melachot, the Chol haMoed. The kind of work that Chazal were gozer not to do is literally going out into the field and working your field because the trees may need pruning, or you didn't finish plowing a certain corner of your field or something. Mamash melacha avodah, in which case the special nature of Chol haMoed will be altogether lost, or at least certainly impaired. And again, as we said in the Yerushalmi, it states, "Shelo nitnu Chol haMoed lo gazru ala melacha b'Chol haMoed ela kedei she'asku b'Torah." So these days should be special days of spiritual activities. That was the intention of Hazal. There can be no question about that. Does it therefore follow that there is a problem, or we should be asking ourselves this question: whether Chol haMoed is at the proper time for tiyulim and the like? The honest answer is no. It's not the proper time for tiyulim. Why in Israel has this become the case? I think it's very obvious. It's because of the lack of something which those who live in Chutz La'aretz, or those who grew up in Chutz La'aretz, will remember very well. It's something called a Sunday. A Sunday is a day when a frum Jew can go on a tiyul, or can go and visit his family or his friends and do various things. It's not Shabbat. He doesn't have to go to work. It's a wonderful invention, this thing called a Sunday. And I'm very much in favor of having such a day here in Israel and rearranging in different ways the work week so that we do have a Sunday. That would also enable religious Jews to claim that you don't have to have football matches on Shabbat. You can do it on Sunday, for example. This has been mentioned by other people in the past as well. It's not purely my initiative or my idea. But the fact is, there should be a day, and it would be a very positive thing if there were a day in Israel, as there is in Chutz La'aretz, which is not Shabbat, not Yom Tov, and you can be with your family, you can do other things, and you can go on tiyulim and what have you. And I am in favor of that, and I think it's high time we do that. And there have been discussions about this, not necessarily even for Torah reasons, but for commercial reasons, because most of the world does not work on Sunday. Certainly not the stock markets and what have you do not work on Sundays. So it's not as necessary at all that Israeli institutions be open for business on Sunday. At any rate, Chol haMoed is not supposed to be a time for tiyulim and making up for all the lost Sundays. That's not what it's supposed to be. I'm not saying it's a sort to go out with your family somewhere into nature to enjoy nature, etc., etc. It's mutar, it's a good thing to do, but the emphasis on Chol haMoed should be on tefillah, on Torah, on more spiritual activities.
Thank you. Benjamin, are you online yet? Have you had anything to clarify? No? Okay. Gabrielle? Nope. Chaim, anything to clarify there?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify also that there is no techum on Yom Tov, even not on Chol haMoed. Is that correct?
There is no techum, that is correct. There is no suggestion of such a thing anyway.
Okay, so the next question is from Chaim. Does the Rav have any tips or advice on how to make the most out of one's Seder? Sorry, how to make the most out of one's Seder. This question applies both to one who is leading a Seder, but also to one who is merely a participant at a Seder being led by someone else.
This is a very good question. I will tell you, first of all, what you should not be doing during your Seder. You do not have to obsess about whether you eat a kazayit of maror or a kazayit of matzah, or what have you, because there's no room for concern here at all. A kazayit is 3 cc, which is a very small amount. It is literally the size of the smaller size olives that we see normally nowadays. The somewhat more average size olives that we see nowadays are approximately 5 cc. And if one wants to be mod mahmir, one can consider kazayit to be 5 cc, even though it's not true, which is a very small amount. So you don't have to obsess about shiurim and measuring things. It's really a distraction, and it is detrimental to getting the most out of the Seder and the days leading up to the Seder. With regards to a revi'ith is actually less than 80 cc, but 80 cc is definitely more a revi'ith, no question. It's actually a bit less. I won't go into the explanation as to why we know this, but we know this, and that's what it is. And it's also not a very large amount at all, so you don't have to drink huge amounts of wine or eat huge amounts of matzah or of anything at all. The whole idea of a revi'ith or a kizayit is that it should be considered an achila or a shetiyah. In other words, when something is on halachic eating, achila hilchatith, it has to be of a certain minimal amount in order to be considered that you actually did something. If you were to eat a crumb of matzah, well, technically you ingested some minute amount of matzah, but that's not considered an achila in halachic terms, for obvious reasons. And by the way, for the same reason, if you ate lo alenu, if you were to eat a small, very small morsel, less than a kazayit of pork, you would not be hayav malkuyoth for that achila either, because it's not considered a real achila. In other words, that is the purpose of those halachot. Now, we have the well-known statement of Hazal, Gadol HaTalmud Shemevi lidei ma'aseh. Rambam explains this statement that this statement comes up in the framework of a discussion in the Talmud what is the ikar? What's the more important thing that a Jew does? The miswot, the action of the miswot, the performance of the miswot, or the limud of the Torah, which tells him how to perform these miswot. The maskana, the maskana of the Talmud is gadol Talmud shemivili demase. Rambam explains that means that you have to learn in order to know what to do. If you don't study the Torah, you won't know what you're required to do. But that explanation, that perush, is first of all self-evident, that if you don't study, if you don't know, then you won't be able to do it. You won't be able to perform the relevant miswah. And second of all, the Maharal points out that Gadolah Talmud shemivili ma'aseh doesn't mean that it comes first, kodem, that it comes before the ma'aseh, but rather it's gadol because it's mevili de ma'aseh. The Maharal explains that when a person studies the Torah, studies the sources of those miswot which he is required to do, by studying the Torah, studying the sources and the halachot and whether it's from the Gemara or from other sources, and being more familiar with the halachic and Torah background of those ma'asim, of those miswot that you are required to do, that creates within a person a desire to perform that mitzvah. A person has a greater desire and a greater, one is more motivated to perform mitzvot. One understands the mitzvah, one understands where it is written in the Mishnah, where it's discussed in the Talmud, what Rambam says, what Rashi says, what the Torah says, etc. The more one studies about the mitzvah that one performs, the more one is involved in that mitzvah, and the more one wishes to perform that mitzvah. And I think this perush of the Maharal is very, very true, very profound and very true. And the same applies, therefore, to the Seder. If one spends the coming days from today till Leila Seder, studying various aspects of the Seder, from the Mishnah, from the Talmud, from the Rambam, can be from Piskei Harosh, or learning the Rif with the Ran, or learning the Rambam, or the Tur, or whatever book that one is able to learn and understand. The more one understands and delves into how the Seder works and how it should be done, and why we do this and why we don't do that, and why it's done in this order and why it's done in that way, the more one will be excited and motivated to actually live these things, to do these things, the Leila Seder, and it will all become very real and very alive and more meaningful to a person. That's number one. Number two, one should all year round, but certainly now in the coming days, try to focus on the significance, the hashkafic, philosophical significance of Pesach for any Jew. Because as a friend of mine once said to me, Pesach, he said to me, is the Leila Seder for me is the highlight of the year. And I frankly feel the same way. I think Leila Seder is the highlight of the year. It is, of course, it should be more of a highlight. It should be even more special. It should be even beyond what we are used to, because there should be a Korban Pesach, which we have to do. And there is no reason on earth why we not have to do a Korban Pesach. It is simply the fact that we are being prevented from doing so. There is not a single Jew on the planet, I believe, who could possibly explain why we are patur from Korban Pesach. I will just remind everybody that over 200 years ago, Rabbi Akiva Eger, Hagaon, Rabbi Akiva Eger, with all his gedulah, with all his greatness, and also with all his anawa, all his humility, wrote to the Hatam Sofer, Rabbi Moshe Agaon, Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Hatam Sofer, who also happened to be his son-in-law, because the Hatam Sofer, in his second marriage, married a daughter of Rabbi Akiva Eger, who was much younger than himself. So they were also related by marriage, and the difference in age between them was very slight. I think a year and a half or something. Rabbi Akiva Eger was a great ano, and he turned to Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Hatam Sofer, and asked him if the Ottoman Sultan were to give permission to the Jews to make a Korban Pesach, would it be possible? Would we be hayav to do so? Would it be possible halachically? And Rabbi Moshe Sofer, the Hatam Sofer, wrote in the Teshuvah, which appears in Shut Hatam Sofer Yoreh De'ah, I believe it is Siman Reish Lamed Waw. And if it's not Reish Lamed Waw, it's Reish Lamed Gimel, but I think it's Reish Lamed Waw. He explains in some detail why it is Vadaya Chova if we were to receive such permission from the Ottoman authorities at that time. And he also explains why there is no halachic impediment to so doing and why there is every possible reason and chova to do so. And that remains as true today as it was then. And I very much doubt that there are greater Talmidei Chachamim in the world, certainly not many today, greater than Rabbi Akiva Eger and the Hatam Sofer. So I would like to hear from anyone who thinks that we don't need to have a Korban Pesach. And if such a person is willing to explain to me why, I'm more than happy to listen. But I don't believe there is such an explanation because I think it's simply completely misguided and wrong to even imagine such a thing. It's clear that this miswah applies. I felt that I had to mention this during this session. So the Leila Seder should be even more special with a Korban Pesach, etc., etc. By the way, you do not need. You should have a Beth Mikdash for that. We should have one. But even without a whole Mikdash, even if we just have a Mizbeach on Har HaBayit in the right spot, which is not a difficult thing to do, it wouldn't take more than 2 days to organize, we could have a Korban Pesach. At any rate, even the limited galut mode Seder, to which we are all used to, unfortunately, it is a highlight of the year because we are celebrating, we are relating, we are reminding ourselves of who we are, where we came from, why we are here, and where we are going. It all begins and ends with Pesach. Everything else is a function of Yetziat Mitzrayim. That is the yesod of all of the Torah, as we see in the Seder HaDibrot, which begins with Anochi Adonai Elohecha Asher Hoseticha Me'eretz Mitzrayim, as Rabbi Yehuda HaLevi points out in Sefer HaKuzari, and Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra writes about in his Perush, and many others. This is the rock bottom foundation of Yahadut, of the Torah, of everything. So the more one studies things relating to all of these issues, the more meaningful and the more beautiful, the more satisfying the Seder will be. If a person arrives at the Seder without really barely remembering from last year what one does and when one does it and why we're doing it, then obviously it will be a much less satisfying and much less meaningful experience.
Okay, thank you very much, Eruv. Chaim, anything to be clarified on that answer?
I mean, I don't know if there's really enough time, but just in regards to being Doresh the Psukim, if the Rav also has some insights. I mean, I know the guy, the Bidura, that is published by Gabriel Martindale.
This is
if the Rav has any more insights.
This is a very good time. I'm glad you mentioned this. I happened to have met earlier today with our great friend, Rabbi Gabriel Martindale, and I asked him if he was willing to give the shiur this week on Tuesday evening on the Haggadah, based on his Haggadah Berura, and he graciously agreed. And I will leave that to him for Tuesday night. I think he will I'm sure he will do a wonderful job. So that is what is called, I believe, in the Alamad Shikura, that is what's called a spoiler.
Indeed. Okay. Thank you very much, Eruv. I am very grateful to Eruv for giving up his time to answer our questions, and to everyone who submitted questions. Wishing everyone a Chag Sameach, and I'll end it here.
It's cool. I wish everybody Chag Pesach Sameach. I'm not going to say kasher. I have no it will be kasher. I wish you a Hag Sameach. It is important to be Sameach. There is a miswah aseh min Torah lismach baregel, and that exists at this time as well, even without the Mikdash, without Korban Haricha and Shlamim. Nevertheless, there is such a miswah, and we should be happy and we should enjoy all of the Hagim, and certainly Erev Pesach. And do not forget those who are in need, the needy. At this time, we all know expenses increase. Many things have to be bought. Many people have experienced a very difficult year and continue to experience difficult times. So the miswah of tzedakah is particularly pertinent at this time. And right now, in the coming days, and as you know, we receive donations from all over the world for this purpose, and we disperse these amounts to worthy and needy people. This is also a good time. I will end with this to thank and to commend all those people who have given in the past, and for instance this year who gave for matanot le'evyonim. I can tell everyone right here and right now that this year we were able to disperse a record amount for matanot le'evyonim of 17,000 shekel, which is not an insignificant amount, and that is just a little bit less than the amount we were able to disperse last Pesach, which was approximately 21,000 shekel. And B'ezrat Hashem, this year we hope to be able to do the same. Kol tov, Hizku v'Yimsu. Shalom and Hag Sameach.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.